As I said last night, my name is Kimberly Kodimer. I've been here at Uchee Pines for 7 years. My main department is the print shop, the multimedia department. I produce the brochures and all the forms and things for the Lifestyle Center, books and promotional materials. And it's been a great blessing to be here. I help out with seminars and on the education committee in the education department. Education is a big topic, and it's one that is very important to me. When I was 17, I went to Sunlight Education Ministry. I apprenticed there for 3 years. It developed into an apprenticeship, and I was there for almost 8 before coming here. And if you aren't familiar with Sunlight, you're going to hear probably a lot about it because it's close to my heart. It was the program that we used in my home school. I've never been to a formal school. I never went to academy or college. I lived on a college campus when I was 15, 16 for a year, and I decided that that wasn't my calling, that God had something different for me. And I'm thankful He led me into an apprenticeship at Sunlight where I was able to expound upon the natural bent of my life, which was publishing and writing. And it's kind of interesting that I ended up in that field because, as you'll hear later on, reading and writing was not my gift early on. It was a challenge for me, but God can take our weaknesses and make them into His strengths. And so I'm thankful for that experience. And I'm thankful, too, that God knows how to get the reins of our hearts. Last night I asked, why are you here? Well, the reason I'm here is because God stopped me in my tracks, and He turned me in another direction that I wasn't going in. When I was around 13, 14, my whole world fell apart. And in the midst of emotional, physical, and mental pain, I came to my breaking point, and that's when God said, "Will you choose me?" And I'm so thankful that I made that choice. And I'm thankful for the lessons that my mother had instilled within me so that when I was at that point of decision, I knew where to turn for the answers. I was heading down a very wrong path, and you think, well, how bad can a 12-year-old be? No, I wasn't into drugs and alcohol, but the Bible says that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That sounds pretty serious. And rebellion was all through my heart and life. I wanted the ways of the world, and I was into some not good things. But my mother, she came to a point and she said, "God, I can't fix my children." She closed the books, the school books. She said, "I don't know how to teach them. I don't know how to get through to them. God, you have to take over." And He did. Through some polishing, we're going to talk about some polishing, He got through to my life. And that's the only one who can get through to your children. You can give them all the right tools, and you need to, but they have to make that choice. And so we provide those tools. We want them to be grown up and polished. That's what we're going to get into now. God can do it, and He can work through you to accomplish that in the lives of the children in your care. Not all of us have children of our own in this room, but we all will come in contact with children, and we want to know how to impart to them something deeper, something higher, so that they can build for eternity. If you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to Psalm 144. Psalm 144. This has been a verse that has captured my attention for many years, and there's so many different directions we could go with it, but I want us to focus on education, specifically child development, when we read this verse, and we're going to dig deeper into it. But Psalm 144 and verse 12 says that our sons may be as what? Plants. That our sons may be as plants grown up. In when? In their youth. That our daughters may be as cornerstones, polished after the similitude of a palace. When I was a child, Paul said, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. How many men there are who have grown to man's estate, but have not outgrown their childhood, who bring the defects of their child life into their religious experience. Brethren, be not children in understanding, howbeit in malice be ye children, but in understanding be men. Our greatest desire in the raising of the children in our care is that they will be grown up and polished. Men and women who are successful, intelligent, and refined. That's our desire. They have grown up. They have put away a childish disposition. They are self-denying, respectful, diligent, dependable. Their minds are well-balanced and developed. They are polished. They are intelligent communicators. Their appearance is respectable. They carry themselves with honor and grace. They don't shrink from difficulties and run from problems. They meet challenges as a means of improving. They are cornerstones, strong supporters in their communities, churches, and families. They are plants. While refined, they are real, living, and ever-growing. To be grown up and polished, this is the goal in our education. This is the goal for the children in our care. So how is it to be done? It's a good goal, right? Do you want that for your children? Do you want that for yourself? So how is it to be done? So let's dig deeper into Psalm 144. The first part of the verse, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth. So what can plants teach us about the growing of our children? What can plants teach us? Well, how do plants grow? If you have your Bibles, Mark 4:28. Turn to Mark 4:28. Mark chapter 4, not chapter 14 like our prayer response, but Mark chapter 4 and verse 28. It says, "For the earth bringeth forth of her fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear." So what do you see here? How would you describe this? The way I look at it is I see stages of the development of a plant, right? Of course, there's many ways in which we could look at this verse, but I see that a plant goes through stages. And what are those stages? It's the blade, then the ear, and after that, the full corn in the ear. So these are the stages of the development of a plant. So what would happen? Let's say we have these beautiful plants behind me, right? What would happen if when it's just starting to grow, we said, I want it to bloom right now. So let's forget the growing stage. Let's just bring on the blooms. I'm sure they could probably try to do that in science. What would happen? What do you think? GMOs, huh? Let's say it's starting to grow, and then they say, well, let's make it bloom really fast. Do you think it's going to grow tall then? Well, it can't, because it's missing a stage. Do you think those blossoms are going to develop properly? It's almost impossible to skip a stage of development with a plant. And we think, oh, that's kind of silly, to expect, a little seedling to produce an apple. That's silly. But with our children, we do it all the time. Do we neglect their stages of development? Because we want the fruit. We want them to be where we think they should be. But what about those stages of development? Now, it's easy when we look at the proper stages of development of a child and we think, I didn't do that. Now what? And we start to feel discouraged, like, I've messed up, it's hopeless. But is anything hopeless with God? Maybe in your own life you say, well, I didn't have that type of an education, so I guess I'm hopeless. No. God has redeeming grace. He loves to take up messed up plans and turn them into perfect outcomes. But we want to see what is his ideal in the raising of our children. And as we look at his ideal, then how can we implement that in training, right where we are, whatever stage we happen to be at? So let's look at the stages of development in a child. The following information I got from Dr. Agatha Thrash, who is one of the founders of Uchee Pines Institute. She was a pathologist and world-renowned expert in health. And in one of her lectures, she talked about the development of a child. She said, from birth till the ages of 8 to 10, the specialization of the brain is determined. Little boys are much more vulnerable to a failure here than are little girls. Now, the failure here is serious. The age that we lose this intense specialization, especially little boys, is between 8 to 10. The brain has two hemispheres. Do you know what they are? It's pretty easy. The right and the left. The right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. The general faculties are stored in the right hemisphere, and these include prayer, perceptions, spirituality, vision, the ability to visualize something not present, imagination, faith, expansive plans, inspiration, art, appreciation, music conception, ambition, hope, desire to know God, capacity to know God, courage, fortitude, trust, energy. There are many, many things that are right hemisphere functions. And we have a dominance of the right hemisphere, 90%, especially in boys, from birth to 8 or 10 years of age. And about that age, the intense specialization begins to shift to the other hemisphere. So let's look at the other hemisphere, the left hemisphere, and what it focuses on. Caution, obedience, meekness, grace, prudence, judgment, right habits, firm principles, enlightenment, decisiveness, restraint, reason, love, provision for the future, reading, writing, and musical instrument playing. So when you look at a child who's about 3 years old, how great is their restraint? Not very great, usually. We're working on that because those things are more firmly fixed in the left hemisphere, and that happens at what age? Between the ages of 8 to 10. Up until that point, the right hemisphere is in full operation, and then the left hemisphere starts to take over. These are all good things, and some of these from the left hemisphere need to be incorporated in early childhood, Dr. Agatha says. Those right habits need to be established early on. However, if we overemphasize left hemisphere things such as reading, writing, arithmetic, and musical instrument playing, all of them left hemisphere functions, if we overemphasize these things before the ages 8 to 10 years, it is at the expense of the right hemisphere. And those specialized functions of the right hemisphere that could be trained will be lost how long? Forever. I don't know if you have noticed this, but there's certain individuals who are just naturally gifted, let's say in music. Music is one of my passions. And early on, they are just like child prodigies. And they play amazing. You cannot tell that it's a child playing. They're just very, very gifted. And so the parents hone in on that, and they really focus on that, and you know what happens to the other qualities? They're unbalanced. They can't do a lot of the practical duties of life because they've worked on which side of the brain? The left side so much, they focused in those areas so much to neglect in that early stage where those capabilities need to be established, and therefore they're imbalanced. Those specialized functions of the right hemisphere that could be trained will be lost forever. Dr. Agatha goes on to say, Seventh-day Adventists have taught for over 100 years that the time to start a child to school is between the ages of 8 to 10 years. Now, once you start them to school, you push them as fast and as far as they can go, and I think that's a key point, because sometimes people get the idea, okay, in the early years, we're not focusing so much on the academics, but then they neglect the opportunity when it comes to push them, to push those children just as far as they can go. So that's key. But prior to that, they should be training the right hemisphere, and to do that, they must be free as lambs. Now, I was thinking about this as I was going over my presentation this morning before coming here. Free as lambs. When you have a lamb and you're shepherding that lamb, do you just send it off into the field and let it play all day? You have to be with it. A lamb can't take care of itself. It needs guidance. It needs direction. It needs protection. So in the training of our children, as they are in those early years where we're focusing on the right hemisphere and those things, the capacity to know God, character development, and obedience, the child should know obedience by the age of 3 years. They should know obedience by the age of 3 years. We're focusing on those things, teaching them to pray, to commune with God, visualize what is heaven like, use their imagination correctly. All those things we're developing, we're working on those aspects in the early years, letting them be free as lambs, taking them out in nature, running, jumping, playing in a constructive way. But we're not just leaving them, letting them go do their thing. We're guiding them, directing them. If they do not get this time, so the time before the ages of 8 to 10 to develop that right hemisphere, the most favorable time to train the right hemisphere has passed. After 8 to 10, you have then only 10% dominance in the right hemisphere. You can train it some, but you're greatly handicapped. So when's the most favorable time to work on those character qualities? Before 8 to 10. Absolutely. That's the time. We really want to focus on it. So then, does that mean after the child turns 8, then we forget about it, right? I don't know about you, but I still have to work on my character. Renowned author and educator Dr. Raymond Moore said that the recipe for genius is, do you want to know what it is? Do you want to raise geniuses? Young people who are smart, right? I'm sure. What parent doesn't want their child to be smart? The recipe for genius: more of family and less of school as we typically define it. More of parents and less of peers. I can't tell you how many times through my childhood they said, she doesn't have socialization. She's going to be deficient. Well, then when I came here to UT Pines, and they nominated me as social committee director. Yes, I'm very deficient when it comes to the social aspect. Where do children learn socialization? In the family. Growing up, I had friends of all ages. I loved especially the older ones because I could learn something from them. How much can a child learn from their peers? Usually not the greatest things. Now, I'm not saying they should never have friends of their own age. We can always take things too far. God wants to bring us back into balance, a proper perspective. But the recipe for genius: more of family and less of school, more of parents and less of peers, more creative freedom and less formal lessons. A mother of 9 children. How many children? Do you think she knew something about child training? Well, you would hope so, right? After 9 children. I think she knew something about the differences of children. Every child is different, and she had 9 of them to work with. She said, I've seen it work in our home with a wide variety of learning styles and academic strengths. And she's speaking of waiting until the child is around the ages of 8 to 10 to start formal lessons. She's had 9 children, and she's seen it work in their home. I have had precocious, naturally academic children who spoke in clear as a bell full sentences at age 2. And children who still lisp at age 6 and don't seem to show much interest in natural school topics. I have auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners, and that's just in my first 3 children. All of them have done better when I wait for their own individual skill readiness. Now, these are 3 points that she brings out that I think are essential in child training, when we think about teaching certain subjects, because every child's different. And so she says, all of them have done better when I wait for their own individual skill readiness. How ready are they skill-wise? To merge with their own individual maturity level, which is self-control, ability to focus, and their own individual interest in learning. Every single one, in basically every single subject. So what are those three things? Skill readiness, maturity level, and interest in learning. Those three things, as she watched the child, so we have to study our children, right? The children in our care, are we watching their development and seeing when are they ready skill-wise, when are they mature in this area, and do they need a push? Because some children need more of a push than others. And then their interest in learning. Plato said, knowledge which is acquired under compulsion has no hold on the mind. Therefore, do not use compulsion, but let early education be a sort of amusement. You will then be better able to discover the child's natural bent. So before the ages of 8 to 10, does that mean we never look at letters? No, of course not. What does it say? Therefore, do not use compulsion, but let early education be a sort of amusement. It's not that we don't teach anything, but it's how we teach it. It's how we teach it. I think of my mother. She's been watching a 5-year-old, little 5-year-old boy. He's full of energy. And it's not that time to sit down and we're going to learn to read right now, or we're going to learn to add and subtract. That's not the time. But the other day, she was working with him on his memory verse. She printed it out on big paper, or big letters on the paper, and they have a song that they listen to, and as they're singing this song, she just point to the words. Just point to the words. And you know, he started to pick that up. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Parents, they say, well, my child really wants to learn to read, and they're only 4. Take them outside, write in the letter a big A. Teach them their letters. It's not a problem, but it's not our focus. What's our focus? Character. That's our focus in these early years. Being at home without much by way of formal education until about the ages of 8 to 10 is the way the vast majority of children learned throughout history. Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Aristotle, and most everyone prior to 1875 or so did not enter the formal school until after age 8. This is how the greats of the past developed curiosity, conviction, and determination. Those are things we want to focus on these early years. Curiosity, creativity, conviction, determination. And they did this by encountering the real world and having some grasp of it and questions about it before setting out to pursue their formal regimented education. A young boy was told by his teacher that he had a confused brain and couldn't learn. And it was true, he wasn't the best student. But that comment really pierced his heart. He went home to his mother, crying, and told her all about it. His mother was not happy in the least. She took her child out of school and proceeded to teach him at home. The boy who couldn't learn, as his teacher said, was Thomas Edison, considered America's greatest inventor. Many years later, he said of his mother, "My mother was the making of me. She was so true, so sure of me, and I felt I had someone to live for, someone I must not disappoint." The question is not, how much does the youth know when he has finished his education, but how much does he care? In teaching education, I tell parents, you may not be able to teach your child everything, but teach them how to learn. Teach them how to study, because if a child learns how to study, it doesn't matter what they need to learn in life. They'll be able to do it. There's many things that if you were to go through my educational experience. You say, well, she didn't learn this, she didn't learn that, she didn't. But I learned the most important thing, how to study. I learned how to care. And in that, it doesn't matter what I face in life, I can figure it out. And that's what we want for our children. How much? It's not about how much the youth knows when he has finished his education, but how much does he care? And about how many orders of things does he care? In fact, how large is the room in which he finds his feet set? And therefore, how full is the life he has before him? Children are as different as plants. Physiologically, it is best to wait until they aren't so little to start with those close academic works. But some are ready earlier than others. I think of my personal experience. I was not ready early, by any means. I didn't read until about the age of 12, and by most standards, that's late. Even according to the research that we're going through, right? 8 to 10, they should be able to get it. But I couldn't get it. And I remember my mom working with me on phonics and pulling out the cards and listening to the sounds, and I thought, how in the world do you get a sound, like a word out of those sounds? It didn't make any sense to me. My mind wasn't ready for it. And I'm sure if I had been in the formal school system, they would have labeled me with a learning disability. But in reality, I just needed more time. And so my mom didn't push. She was very wise. She simply read a lot to me, especially good, true stories. And I developed a love for learning, a love for reading. And when my mind was ready, I learned. Holding off on a lot of book work in the early years doesn't mean you teach nothing. You diligently work on the specializations of the right hemisphere, all the while studying who your child is. How do they best learn? Not all children are the same, and that's one of the issues with a classroom setting, because we put them in a box. And all children have to learn the same way, but not all children learn the same way. And so they think, well, I'm not very smart. I don't get it as quickly as, and this can even happen in the home, right? As my brother. My brother was naturally academic, very intelligent. He learned to read early. Academics weren't a problem for him. He didn't have to work very hard. All through high school, he didn't really study, and he passed all of his tests. He went to the regular school system, and then he got to college, and when things got difficult, he didn't study. He didn't apply himself because he didn't think he had to, and it's been a struggle for him. But every child is different. How do they best learn? How can we give them the tools, the resources for their personal development? And that's why we need to study our child. How are they different? How do they best learn? I recently asked a father who's a teacher, and he's raised 6 very strong, independent thinkers. All of his 6 children are very well-versed in many areas. Some have their own business. His oldest daughter, when she wanted to learn to drive and so forth, he said, okay, let's get a car. And it was a broken down car, and she had to rebuild, I don't know if it was the engine or something. She had to learn that. He taught them to be very independent thinkers. So I asked him, I said, so what do you think are some of the keys to the success that you have had in the training of your children? Not only are you a teacher, but you're also a successful parent to the onlooker. And he gave me a number of points, 11 of them, but this particular one I just want to bring in to this section of the presentation. It really struck me. He said, we are farmers, not architects. And I thought, whoa, what does that mean? We are farmers, not architects. And so I asked him, and he said, architects use materials to build what they need. Think about your experience with the children in your care. Do you have what you want them to become? Are you using materials to build what you need in them? Farmers, on the other hand, give plants what the plants need. The father spends his life studying his children to understand who they are and then cultivates those attributes. The teacher should carefully study the disposition and character of his pupils, that he may adapt his teaching to their peculiar needs. He has a garden to tend, in which are plants differing widely in nature, form, and development. While a few may appear beautiful and symmetrical, many others have become dwarfed and misshapen by neglect. So this right here, according to the development of a plant, there's certain things you need to teach. And if we don't teach those at those stages, we are neglecting them. They're dwarfed and misshapen by neglect. We don't want to do that. We want to redeem the time. The preceding gardener, the one who comes after, has not done, or the one who came before, has not done his work faithfully. By proper cultivation, these plants and shrubs might have been made to grow up comely and beautiful, but those to whom was committed the care of the tender plantlets left them to the mercy of circumstances, and now the work of training and cultivation is increased tenfold. Tenfold. So we want to take advantage of our opportunities, developing that right hemisphere, and then at the proper developmental stage, developing that left hemisphere. Otherwise, our work is increased tenfold. It's not impossible. With God, all things are possible. He could even take a 12-year-old who is just learning to read, rebellious, wanting the ways of the world, and bring them back. God can do it. He wants to redeem the time in our lives. The teacher must bring to his difficult task, this is your part, patience, forbearance, and gentleness, and the gentleness of Christ. Dr. Mark talked about education, that one of the things we're taking to heaven is our thoughts. And he talked about the importance of the parent's role. We want our children to be determined, honorable, focused. Where does it begin? With us. His heart must glow with the same love that led the Lord of life and glory to die for a lost world. Patience and perseverance will not fail of a reward, while his best efforts will sometimes prove unavailing. The faithful teacher will see fruit of his labor. Noble characters and useful lives will richly repay his toil and care. Last education seminar, I gave a presentation called Faithfulness versus Success. It's on our YouTube channel. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. The key in this whole aspect of child training is faithfulness. Faithfulness. Education is not filling a bucket. It's not pouring into that bucket all that you think that they're going to need to become what you want them to become. It's not filling that bucket. But rather, it's lighting a fire. Plants need proper nourishment in order to grow, and likewise, children need proper nourishment in order to grow. But we aren't just interested in one aspect of growth. We want the complete package. We want them to be a whole person, mentally, physically, and spiritually. When you think of a plant, what are some of the elements that a plant needs to grow? Sunlight, water, good soil, so that the food, the proper nourishment. What else? What is it? Okay, so fertilization. How about proper environment, like proper temperature control? So there's lots of things that a plant needs to grow. So also do children. Children need proper elements to grow. These are some of the things that came to my mind. Let's take the physical. They need a nutritious diet, healthy lifestyle, lots of physical activity, especially in the early years. Don't keep them indoors. This is the time. Get them out. They need the discipline of chores and work corresponding to their age. For the mental, they need the cultivation of the intellect through study and proper reading material at the appropriate developmental stages, incorporating academics as the mind and body are ready to receive them. They need to develop those language and communication skills. And that's why we love to have a family Sabbath school. And you're going to get to experience that on Sabbath. We'll tell you more about that later. But teach your children how to be speakers, how to communicate, not just one-on-one, but in a group of people. These are important skills. Develop that mental. They also need the proper elements in order to grow in the spiritual aspect. Moral instruction, the cultivation of the character. We want them to be respectful, dependable, honest, kind, thoughtful, honorable. We want to disciple them to Christ. Just because a child is born into a Christian home doesn't make them a Christian. I was probably one of the biggest heathens out there. They need to be discipled. They might be able to give you all the right Bible verses, but that's not conversion. Disciple them to Christ. When the Bible says that our goal is that our children, especially our boys, grow up, it's not just talking about the physical aspect. It's the complete person, grown up mentally, physically, and spiritually. James 1, verse 4. James 1, verse 4 says, "Let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." We want that perfect, complete package, wanting nothing, but it takes time. Patience. We can't miss a developmental stage and expect fruit. True education takes time, it takes patience. A plant doesn't grow to maturity overnight. Some plants grow faster than others, but under the right conditions, each one grows to its full potential. The Bible says that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth. That word plant in this reference means fix, strike, root, fasten, ever growing. Roots go deep, grounded, living, nourishing, healing, green, full of faith. The training we give to the children in our care is to ground them, to fasten them, cause their roots to go deep, nourish, heal. Education isn't just about book learning. Yes, book learning is important, but education includes the whole person. So if I were to summarize things to teach your children, I would summarize it in just 3 words. Teach them to think, to work, and to love. And we could spend the next 30 minutes talking about just what those mean. But I'm just going to give you a few points under each. Teach them to think, to reason from cause to effect. Teach them reading, studying. Teach them to work, to be industrious, use their hands, develop the physical. Teach them to love. Love God and man. Have a high moral character. We want to have smart children. We don't want them to just have the right answers to pass a test, but to know how to think, how to work, and how to love. Men and women who are successful, intelligent, and refined. But there's another aspect to this verse in Psalm 144 that we need to look at. We've looked at how a plant grows and took it from that perspective, but what about the next perspective that this verse brings out? That our daughters may be as cornerstones, polished after the similitude of a palace. What can this teach us about the development of our children and what kind of an education we need to give them? Children are to be educated and trained to become disciples of Christ, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace. This work of molding, refining, and polishing is the mother's. The character of the child is to be developed. The mother must engrave upon the tablet of the heart lessons as enduring as eternity, and she will surely meet the displeasure of the Lord if she neglects this sacred work or allows anything to interfere with it. So when you have children, for those who don't have children, and when you have children now, we think, I have to give up my life for this child? Yes. Your life is now your child. That was one of the points that that father shared with me. Your universe becomes that child. But you don't tell them that. But you pour into them everything possible so that they can succeed. And if we neglect this sacred work, if we allow anything, even good things, to come in and interfere, we have the displeasure of the Lord. This is the most important work. It's not an easy work, but it is the most important. In the ancient world, the cornerstone was the most important stone in the building. It set the level, angle, and outer dimensions of the building. It had to be level and squared true so that all the other stones could be set from it. If it were not level, then as the walls of the building were erected, what do you think would happen? That cornerstone isn't level, so what's going to happen to the walls, children? Are they going to be standing straight? It's impossible because that cornerstone, that foundation stone isn't straight. So the walls as they go up are going to lean and fall. So the cornerstone is the most important stone in the building. We are raising leaders, the future bulwarks of society. They must become strong, true, well-shaped, and polished. So how is this done? We've already looked at how it's done from the perspective of growing a plant, but now what about the polishing of a stone? We've been studying rocks in our family Sabbath school. In your packets that you should have got in registration, there's a little booklet called the Family Bible Lesson. That's our Sabbath school lesson for this coming Sabbath. And we're studying rocks for 3 months. We study one nature topic along with a Bible lesson each week and a different character quality. And so this quarter, we're studying about rocks. And so my mom, she got this thing to polish the rocks. Do you know what it's called? I don't know, maybe the fancy term, but it's a rock tumbler. So you take your rough stone, you put it in there with some water and some, what do you think? Grit. Something rough. Some like sand type stuff. And you put it in there and it goes like this. Tumbles, tumbles, tumbles. And it's very noisy and so many people, it was in the education building and I worked there. And people would come into my office and they say, something's going on in your mom's classroom. Is that okay? It's like, yeah, that's the rock tumbler. So in order to polish a stone, to remove those rough edges, it has to be tumbled with hard material and water to smooth away those rough edges. So how can we apply this to the polishing of our children? And maybe ourselves, as the case may be. The only way to achieve polished characters where all the rough, coarse things of the natural heart are removed is by going through hard times. So here's the lesson for parents and teachers. Do not spoil your children. Do not give them everything they want. Don't indulge them. They are not the ruler of the home or the classroom. Don't shield them from every difficulty, but rather teach them how to press through and how to conquer. Let them help bear the burdens of the home. Teach them to work. My mother, as I mentioned, has been working with a little 5-year-old, very energetic little boy, full of life, loves people, doesn't know a stranger, thinks that he's invincible, literally. And so in our home, we eat vegetables, and I hope you do too. Do you think a 5-year-old likes salad or strawberries better? Strawberries, of course, you know, or a peach or something sweet, maybe even ice cream. Well, in our home, we eat vegetables. And so when we come to that table and it's time to eat that salad, what do? You remove the difficulty, right? Oh, I don't want to do it. You remove it, right? No. You teach them how to eat it. Now, that's not always saying you're going to eat this or you're going to get in trouble. No. You teach them how to eat it. Well, the way I like to eat vegetables is with a dressing A good sauce. If you have a good sauce, you can just about eat anything, I've learned. You just have to find the good sauce. So, okay, you don't like the salad, maybe dip it in some dressing. Or you don't like the carrot, dip it in some dressing. Oh, if you don't like that, okay, well, take a bite of cooked food, take a bite of vegetables. Teach them how to do it. And they have to do it. It's the rule. But you don't remove the difficulty. You teach them how to work through it. I also think of my experience as a violin teacher. I haven't always felt very successful in this area. And with one of my students, we had a hard time. And they had a good ear for music, but they were very critical of themselves. And so sometimes we would come to a lesson and we would look at a piece, oh no, that's hard, I cannot do it, absolutely not, I'm never gonna get this. Maybe you've been there, maybe you're that person. So what do? You remove the difficulty, right? Okay, well, let's go on to something easier. Well, that's not gonna help them grow. So I would tell them that, all through life you're gonna meet with challenges. And it's not that you're not smart, you can do it. But you have to apply yourself. You have to work through those difficulties, little by little. We call it in music woodshedding. We're gonna woodshed. We're gonna take it apart piece by piece, work on those hard places. And so there was this one piece, I knew as soon as I looked at that piece, this isn't gonna work. Because my student's gonna look at this piece and they're gonna say, that's impossible, I'm never gonna get this. And they wouldn't even try. So what we did is we took that piece and we cut it into measures. And so we would practice just the first measure. I would give her the first measure, and maybe the middle measure and another measure. And we would just work on that. And then the next week, we would get another measure. And you know what happened? By the time we went through each measure, they had learned the whole piece, and they didn't even realize it. They could play it from beginning to end. We conquered that difficulty. Teach your children how to succeed. Yes, you see a wall before you, but it's not impossible to break through. And think about that in your own life. How are you working through those challenges? Maybe it's the challenge of raising your children. So in child training, we want to teach our children to get through difficulties, and real life situations provide plenty of opportunities for polishing. These are some of the areas in which I saw that you could be polished. Maybe you've been there. Chores. Chores require polishing. Gardening. I am not a fan of the garden, but it's a way to be polished, right? Cooking, learning an instrument. And if you come this afternoon, we're going to learn more about why music is even important. That's an area in which we can be polished. Running a household, starting and maintaining a little business, keeping their room and personal space in order, being kind and helpful to those around them, mission trips, and dealing with people. Don't always try to get your child out of a situation. Don't always side with them in their conflicts. Teach them how to forgive, how to put the best construction on the actions of others, how to resolve interpersonal problems, because it's not just now that it's going to affect them. They're going to deal with different personalities and minds for the rest of their lives. And the question is, how do you deal with them? When you don't get along with someone, when they rub you the wrong way, that polishing, how do you respond? We have to change ourselves so that we can help our children. With God's power, we can do that. We can be polished. Use those lessons, those real-life experiences, as a means of polishing. One of my favorite quotes after becoming a Christian, I went through a lot of polishing, by the way, was from Steps to Christ. It said, "The thorn and the thistle, the difficulties and trials that make his life one of toil and care, were appointed for his good, as a part of the training needful in God's plan for his uplifting from the ruin and degradation that sin has wrought." Those thorns and those thistles, those difficulties, those trials, we need them for our uplifting. There was another quote I memorized early on in my Christian experience from Desire of Ages. I think it's page 71 or thereabouts. It said that temptation, poverty, and adversity is the very discipline needed to develop purity and firmness. We need those polishing experiences. We need those difficulties to help us become better people. Challenges are needful. But having said that, we don't need to manufacture difficulties. Some people say, okay, I'm going to make my child's life really hard because that's what they need. No. Life will be sure to bring difficulties your way. You don't have to manufacture them. But teach your child to press through the difficulty instead of removing the challenge. There's an article written by Carol S. Dweck, professor of psychology at Stanford University, and it's entitled The Secret to Raising Smart Kids. There's the link here on the screen. And this article, I don't have time to read the whole thing. It's excellent. And it provides another angle we need to look at in the polishing aspect. A brilliant student, Jonathan, sailed through grade school. He completed his assignments easily and routinely earned A's. Jonathan puzzled over why some of his classmates struggled, and his parents told him he had a special gift. In the 7th grade, however, Jonathan suddenly lost interest in school, refusing to do homework or study for tests. As a consequence, his grades plummeted. His parents tried to boost their son's confidence by assuring him that he was very smart, but their attempts failed to motivate Jonathan. Schoolwork, their son maintained, was boring and pointless. Our society worships talent, and many people assume that possessing superior intelligence or ability, along with confidence in that ability, is a recipe for success. In fact, however, more than 35 years of scientific investigation suggests that an overemphasis on intellect or talent leaves people vulnerable to failure, fearful of challenges, and unwilling to remedy their shortcomings. The result plays out in children like Jonathan, who coast through the early grades under the dangerous notion that no effort, academic achievement defines them as smart or gifted. Such children hold an implicit belief that intelligence is innate and fixed, making striving to learn seem far less important than being or looking smart. This belief also makes them see challenges, mistakes, and even the need to exert effort as threats to their ego rather than as opportunities to improve. And it causes them to lose confidence and motivation when the work is no longer easy for them. Going on. Praising children's innate abilities, as Jonathan's parents did, reinforces this mindset, which can also prevent young athletes or people in the workplace or even marriages from living up to their potential. On the other hand, our studies show that teaching people to have a growth mindset, which encourages a focus on process consisting of personal effort and effective strategies, rather than on intelligence or talent, helps make them into high achievers in school and in life. This whole article goes into many different studies that they've done on this topic of raising smart children and the aspect of how we encourage our children, if we're focusing on talent or if we're focusing on ability, their work, their effort that they're putting in. And it shows how it changes their mindset in approaching problems. I just want to cover just a few of those studies that were done. Some students in one of the studies reacted defensively to mistakes. They put down their skills with comments such as, "I never did have a good memory." Have you done it to yourself? Have you said, "Oh, I'm not very smart. I never did have a good memory"? When we do this, as the study showed, their problem-solving strategies deteriorated. So every time we say, "I'm not good enough in this area, I'm not that gifted," we are actually hindering our progress. Others, meanwhile, in this study showed that those who focused on fixing errors and honing their skills succeeded. One advised himself, "I should slow down and try to figure this out." That's a good mindset. Maybe I'm going too fast. I just need to slow down and figure it out. There were 2 school children, which in particular were inspiring. One, in the wake of difficulty, pulled up his chair, rubbed his hands together, smacked his lips, and said, "I love a challenge." The other, also confronting hard problems, looked up at the experimenter and approvingly declared, "I was hoping this would be informative." Predictably, the students with this attitude outperformed their cohorts in these studies. The helpless ones believe that intelligence is a fixed trait. You have only a certain amount, and that's that. I call this a fixed mindset. Mistakes crack their self-confidence because they attribute errors to a lack of ability, which they feel powerless to change. They avoid challenges because challenges make mistakes more likely and looking smart less so. Like Jonathan, such children shun effort in the belief that having to work hard means they are dumb. The mastery-oriented children, on the other hand, think intelligence is malleable and can be developed through education and hard work. They want to learn above all else. After all, if you believe you can expand your intellectual skills, you want to do just that. Because slip-ups stem from a lack of effort or acquired skills, not fixed ability, they can be remedied by perseverance. Challenges are energizing rather than intimidating. They offer opportunities to learn. Students with such a growth mindset we predicted were destined for greater academic success and were quite likely to outperform their counterparts. This article showed how the growth mindset affects not only their education, but their future workplace and relationships. We don't have time to go into that. You can read it on your own. But the question is asked, how do we transmit a growth mindset to our children? One way the article recommended is by teaching them stories of those who had to apply themselves to succeed. Don't just tell them the stories about those geniuses who they could rattle off all the math numbers in the world, and get all the problems right with no apparent effort. Those are the rare exceptions. Most of us are pretty common, and we have to work hard, some harder than others. That doesn't mean we're dumb. That just means that we have to put in effort, and we will succeed. Also, the article brings out that one way we can transmit a growth mindset to our children is by proper praise. Proper praise. I'm going to skip some of these things. We have found that intelligence praise encouraged a fixed mindset. So when you just praise, when you encourage, like, you're so smart, I'm sure you're going to get this. When we focus in that area, that type of a mindset, that fixed mindset, that it hinders their progress. Those congratulated for their intelligence, for example, shied away from a challenging assignment. They wanted an easy one instead, far more often than the kids applauded for their process. Most of those lauded for their hard work wanted the difficult problem set from which they would learn. When we gave everyone hard problems anyway, those praised for being smart became discouraged, doubting their ability, and their scores, even on an easier problem set we gave them afterward, declined as compared with their previous results on equivalent problems. So here, they gave everyone easy problems. They did well. Then they praised one group. They said, "You're so smart." And then they praised the other group for their hard work. And then they gave them hard problems. And the ones who were praised for their ability, their gift, their smartness, they couldn't do it. Oh, they didn't even try. But the other ones who were praised for their hard work, their effort, they said, "Oh yeah, let me try this. I can figure this out." And then even when they gave them easier problems like the first time before they had praised the two groups, the ones on the one side who had been praised for their intelligence, they couldn't even do those problems, but they had just done them. But because their mindset changed, that it's because of their intelligence, they couldn't even do those easy problems that they had the ability to do. But the ones who were praised for their effort, their work, even did better. Students praised for their hard work did not lose confidence when faced with the harder questions, and their performance improved remarkably on the easier problems that followed. So what are some examples of good types of encouragement that foster a growth mindset? Here are some. You did a good job drawing. I like the detail you added to the people's faces. And I think this is important to notice how the praise is done. Because some people, they read these things and they go, "Oh no, I don't want to foster pride," which is one area we haven't even covered. So I'm not going to praise. I'm not going to comment on any time that they do something well. It's like, oh, well, thank you for this. People need encouragement, especially children. You should be your child's biggest fan, but it's how we do it. So yes, tell them they did a good job, but focus also on why. I like the detail you added to the people's faces. You really studied for your social studies test. You read the material over several times, outlined it, and tested yourself on it. It really worked. There's others there, but we don't have time to read them all. There's also an example of focusing on how we view challenges, telling your children that those challenges are an aid to getting better. Some examples of this. This is hard. This is fun. Oh, sorry, that was too easy, no fun. Let's do something more challenging that you can learn from. And then I like the last one. Mistakes are so interesting. Here's a wonderful mistake. Let's see what we can learn from it. When something goes wrong, okay, you don't have to have a whole outburst and get so angry over it. Why did it go wrong? Let's analyze it. How can we do better? How can we learn from this mistake? But did you notice that in some of these examples, or all of them really, that you have to embrace it yourself? If you don't have this approach to life, your children won't either. So when you face those challenges, those things that are hard to get through, how do you respond? As obstacles, do you respond as that they're obstacles to be overcome or walls that will never be broken down? Teach your children not to avoid the challenges in their lives. Teach your children to master them, and it begins with how we think ourselves. Through the process of working through difficulties, we are being tumbled in the grit and the water. Those rough stones are being polished for something beautiful. By a misconception of the true nature and object of education, many have been led into serious and even fatal errors. Such a mistake is made when the regulation of the heart or the establishment of principles is neglected in the effort to secure intellectual culture, or when eternal interests are overlooked in the eager desire for temporal advantages. To make the possession of worldly honor or riches our ruling motive is unworthy of one who has been redeemed by the blood of Christ. It should rather be our aim to gain knowledge and wisdom that we may become better Christians and be prepared for greater usefulness, rendering more faithful service to our Creator, and by our example and influence leading others also to glorify God. Here is something real, something tangible, not only words but deeds, not only the affections of the heart, but the service of the life must be devoted to our Master. There is no work more important than the education of our youth. The future of society will be determined by the youth of today. I don't have time to read the rest of the quote. It talks about how Satan is after our youth, and if we don't do the job, he will. And it won't be the job that we want him to do. That our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace. Our greatest desire in raising little ones is that they will be grown up and polished. Men and women who are successful, intelligent, refined, they have grown up. They have put away a childish disposition. They are self-denying, respectful, diligent, dependable. Their minds are well balanced and developed. They are polished. They are intelligent communicators. Their appearance is respectable. They carry themselves with honor and grace. They don't shrink from difficulties and run from problems. They meet challenges as a means of improving. They are cornerstones, strong supporters in their communities and churches and families. They are plants. While refined, they are real, living, and ever growing. This is the outcome we want for our children, for ourselves. This is the focus of our education. As instructors and teachers of children, may we learn when to teach what, how to nourish the plant for growth and foster an environment for polishing, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we want ourselves to be grown up and polished. And we want to impart this to our children, the children in our care, the ones that come in contact with us, that we will not be those ones who hinder their growth and their refining, but that we will aid in it. Give us wisdom how to do this. We don't know each child, but you do. Teach us that we may teach, that we may bring to you grown up and polished individuals for your kingdom. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Mark chapter 14:38.